Welcome to Dot Social, the first podcast to explore the world of decentralized social media. Each episode, host Mike McCue talks to a leader in this movement, someone who sees the Fediverse's tremendous potential and understands that this could be the internet's next wave. Today, Mike's talking to John O'Nolan, the founder and CEO of Ghost, an open source publishing platform for professionals. John believes that to have journalism with integrity, you have to have technology with integrity. Learn how he plans on living up to that promise. We hope you enjoy this conversation.
John O'Nolan, welcome to Dot Social.
Thanks for having me.
It's fantastic to have you here. There's a lot to talk about. You're the founder and CEO of Ghost, which is a incredibly well-respected platform for publishing, and we're going to talk all about that. But I thought a good place to start is you recently announced that you're going to be federating over ActvityPub. And this is a huge, huge announcement. It was generated a lot of excitement. Certainly from me and many others, we are incredibly excited about what you're doing here. So maybe a good place to start is why? Why are you federating over ActvityPub?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for those kind words. We've been an independent open source publishing platform for 10 years, and over that kind of decade, we've had various competitors all along the way. And there have been different platforms that have been trendy and popular at different times. But one thing that they've all had in common has been a social interaction layer that has allowed their publishers to interact with one another, to follow, to like, to subscribe, to respond. And that has always been the hardest sell about having an independent website and being on your own infrastructure, your own domain, it's been lonely. People set up on the open web, maybe with WordPress in the past, maybe with Ghost today, and they're publishing, but who's reading? Who is engaging? And for a long time, you didn't know. Early in the blogosphere days, Google Analytics traffic was exciting. And then it became less exciting, right, as social networks got big. And so we always kind of dreamed of trying to have some sort of ability for our publishers to interact and be connected to one another, but we couldn't figure out how. And at some point in 2017, this was way before ActvityPub, we dreamed up our own open API idea that was sort of an abstraction on top of RSS that would allow for some of these things to generate a decentralized newsfeed. But we were too small to ever turn that into a reality. And then a couple of years later, ActvityPub came out, looked very interesting, but we couldn't quite figure out how to take the spec and turn it into a product. And we've been watching the space closely, and obviously Mastodon's done an amazing job. You, yourself, and Flipboard have done a lot of work recently. Threads. Suddenly, lots of platforms getting into this space makes it feel like ActvityPub's having a moment. So this year, we're looking at the space again. I was talking to Chris Messina, who's a very vocal advocate for ActvityPub. And it just felt like the time of the Fediverse is now. It felt like this is the time to do it. And so we thought we'd test the waters by saying that we're going to do it, and that we're going to experiment at the very least and see how strong the interest is. And answer, very strong. A lot of interest.
Yeah, from users and creators alike, I assume, right? Famously, Casey Newton switched over to Ghost from Substack, about 6 months ago or something like that?
That's right.
And Platformer.news is a fantastic site running on Ghost. It's every bit as good as anything he had on Substack. It's a very clean user experience. But you're right that he doesn't know, who is reading his stuff. Now, he does have a subscription model, so that obviously helps with the email connection and so on. But, did you talk to Casey or other creators about ActvityPub, and what did you hear from them as you were thinking about this?
Yeah. Talked to some before and some after. We're kind of talking about getting into the space. There's a lot of interest, which I would describe as tentative and sometimes apprehensive. There's definitely a sentiment outside of, our space, the kind of product builders, maker space, There's a sense of, I'm not completely sure I understand what it is. Can you tell me again what it is? That's the most common conversation I have. And so there's that, but there's also this aside of everyone being exhausted by the antics of algorithms and social networks, and everyone hearing that this fediverse thing, like Threads is doing something with that, and Mastodon, like that's an alternative. So everyone's got this little sense that there might be a possibility of something special that's different and that's driven by different incentives. And these two things are a little bit in tension with one another at the moment. So it's kind of like, tell me what it is, but what is it? I don't understand it. No, I don't. It's too much effort. But what is it again? And so that feels like a really special moment, an opportunity, if we can harness it, if we can create good products that people don't necessarily have to understand the technical foundations of. We could be onto something, I think. But it's a real inflection point now, I think.
It is. And when you look at, for example, with some of these writers that were on Substack prior and have now since moved to Ghost, presumably one of the things that they're telling you that they miss is like the discovery capabilities that they saw on Substack, which kind of in the Substack walled garden, they've been innovating a lot on, how to recommend other blogs to people who are reading one blog, and lots of their, kind of the Substack notes capability and so on. So when you look at ActivityPub and you look at that kind of discovery realm that Substack has been working on, what are your thoughts there and how that could happen on Ghost?
Yeah, I think there's a lot we can do there. So we have a similar recommendation feature. We also have a directory called Ghost Explore, which is similar to the way Substack allows you to discover other writers. I think the ActivityPub layer is going to... these are very structured forms of discovery, right? You have to go somewhere, you have to find a list, and then you you manually discover stuff. I think what ActivityPub does that's interesting is it creates an organic web of discovery, which in my mind, I think Twitter and then Tumblr like really nailed this, is when someone else has retweeted or commented on that you've never heard of, and you're like, that's hilarious, or that's interesting. And you click on a profile that you weren't looking for, that just came to you because someone who you already know shared it. I think it potentially unlocks some of that. And we can still augment that with a directory. We can still augment that with recommendations manually, either from us or from publishers to each other. But that organic piece of just, I like this, you might like it too. There's something magic there when you can get it right. And I think that's exciting.
That is exciting. One of the things that I'm always constantly amazed by is I'll find some podcast or some writer, some blog that I'd never heard of before, and it's amazing. And a bunch of other people have already been like, "Yeah, of course, you should be listening to this podcast. You should be reading this writer." And it's amazing to me that I still sometimes don't discover these things. And I do think that that is a big need, especially now with all the concern about SEO going away, and how the search engines are going to be gradually bringing all of this content up into AI summaries. How do you discover some really awesome writer in this new world?
Did you see that Google search algorithm leak yesterday that came out as well?
I did.
I mean, that just underscored, for anyone who doesn't know, there was a big leak of Google's search algorithm that was published by Rand Fishkin, who is the founder of Moz. And it sort of underscored that for years, Google has been not penalizing, but not promoting small sites specifically. It has been ranking larger sites higher. So if it has felt to you over the last number of years like your ability to discover weird little crazy sites on the internet has gone down in, when you search for stuff and you click on something and you kind of just end up on Wirecutter and Amazon over and over and over again, it's not just in your head. Now we know that that's true. And that's... I think that's really sad. I think that it's not what the web should be.
I know for a lot of people who've worked at Google in the past, and I know that there was a significant amount of emphasis placed on discovery of smaller sites. But I don't know, how that's played out recently. And, that I think that concern of, if you're a blogger, you're a podcaster, you're a YouTuber, creator, how do you get discovered? in this new world. And yeah, it's already been on a decline, to your point, right? And I do think that ActivityPub really, what it does is it establishes a human connection that's incredibly needed now as a source of discovery, right? I trust you. You really think, a blog post is really great. You post that. I'm following you. I now see that blog post. I discover that blog. Or let's say you comment on a blog post. You didn't even, boost it. You just commented on it, but I'm following you and I see that comment and I now discover that blog post, right? So that is the beauty, I think, of ActivityPub. And, the fact that you're baking that in at a core level into Ghost is incredibly exciting for discovery.
Absolutely. And one thing that we're doing slightly differently in how we're thinking about it to what seems to be the default. So there's a number of publishing platforms with long-form content who've implemented ActivityPub, and so far they've done so in a kind of broadcast manner. So you can send your posts out into the ActivityPub network, and people on Mastodon could follow. But you don't really know what happens when you do that. You're just sending stuff out. And I think that's great. It's a step in the right direction, but it misses a really important part of the story, which is ActivityPub is about a two-way connection, not a one-way broadcast. RSS is a one-way broadcast, and you just put stuff out into the world, people can subscribe. But what we're focusing on is a reader as well as a publisher, so that when you put something out into the world, you can see what happens, and people can respond back to you, and you can interact with them, and you have a more direct feeling of being part of a network, not just pushing stuff into a network. And I think that is where the real potential is.
Right. So it's not just a two-way protocol, it's a two-way experience.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a big deal. So in your mind's eye, as you're thinking through the product, presumably you're in product meetings every day working on this, right?
Sure.
What is your ideal experience? Let's say you come to, a blog on Ghost. How is someone who doesn't know ActivityPub even exists, how are they going to experience this?
Yeah. This is the product problem, I think, that we think about the most. And I think the complete answer is not one I can give now, because I think a large proportion of this is going to come out through discovery. And we are some of our hypotheses will be proved wrong. Some hopefully will be proved right. But definitely. But the way we're thinking about it so far is to try as much as possible to have you not need to know what ActivityPub is to get started. But if you already do know what ActivityPub is, then it should feel familiar. And so one of the things ActivityPub has in common with email is an address, right? You're a user at a domain. We know that. It's very recognizable. It's very simple. It's very similar to email. And what Ghost already has when you visit a website, say platformer.news, is this subscription form where you can sign up, but you can also sign in with an email address. And what the direction we're going to try and go is to see if we can have that one box, that input box, support both email addresses as well as ActivityPub handles. So you could sign up or sign in with either one of those. And that's just a case of where do we send the magic link or where do we send the content? But either way, we can send it to where you're expecting to receive it. So that's the idea. Whether we can pull it off.
I mean, and let me just try this out for a second. So I'm going to be able to come to a blog that's running on Ghost, and I'm going to be able to say, all right, I want to subscribe to this newsletter. I can type in Mike at flipboard.social, which is my fediverse address, and the right thing will happen. Now effectively, it's as if I just hit follow on that blog in Mastodon, and now I'm seeing it in my home timeline when new posts come.
Yeah, and the challenge for us will be, how seamless can we make that experience so that it feels like you just put in one thing and push the button and what you expect it to happen happens. I think there's some technical challenges in making that feel really simple, that we've kind of seen in some of the follow buttons and other ActivityPub products, right? Sometimes you have redirects and pop-ups that immediately start feeling confusing. And so to the extent that we can make those go away, I think we'll determine how user-friendly it feels.
Uh-huh. Right. And then I guess when let's say I've put in my ActivityPub address, Mike at Flipboard.social, you now determine, okay, this guy's actually on ActivityPub. He's got an account on the Fediverse. Now I can, presumably, I would be able to reply to one of these posts on this website and type in my reply. And then anyone following me would see, oh, Mike just commented on this article.
Yeah, exactly. So the Ghost has memberships, which is why an email sign up is also a login. So if you put in your email address, we'll send you an email and say, click this button to sign in. Once you're signed in, you're now an authenticated user. You can leave a comment, you can like posts, you can like comments, you can interact. We can do the same thing, we think, with ActivityPub handles. It depends somewhat on the private mention or DM, encrypted DM features that we can utilize or work with that are in existence in other ActivityPub products. As long as we can find our way around those to be able to send a magic link to authenticate, then yeah, you'll be able to sign in, comment, reply, interact without needing a password, without needing to remember details, just through JSON Web Tokens.
So that's fantastic. So basically, if I have a Fediverse account, wherever I created that, maybe I created it on Mastodon.social, maybe I created it through Flipboard, maybe I created it somewhere else. I could basically put in my address into this one box and then go through an authentication process where now I'm full-blown ActivityPub client experience. I could boost, presumably, posts. I could favorite. I could reply. I can follow people.
As long as your ActivityPub platform of choice has a way of receiving private messages of some sort, I think we can do it. And then if it doesn't, we might have to fall back to email or something like that. This is where we still have a lot to figure out. There's a lot of theoretical ideas in here, but that's the dream. That's where we want to get to. And we think it could be really special if we can have, a platformer.news community that is its own community, but it is also part of and connected to a broader network of individuals that might be made up of all kinds of different communities across the web.
That is going to be an absolute game changer for discovery, right? Because I bring my whole follow graph to platformer.news, and then I reply to a story, on that website, and now people will discover not just my comment, but also that article even exists, right?
What you were commenting on.
So, yeah. And that's just such a big deal, right? Hitting boost, it's such an easy, thing to do. Like, oh yeah, I just want to share this with my followers. And of course, that's for any, blogger, for any, newsletter owner, this is amazing, right? Because now they just have a bunch more people discovering their content coming into the top of the funnel. They can then decide whether they want to, how much of that content they want to have be free versus, behind some sort of paywall.
How's that going to work in Flipboard? Where do you think that'll sit?
Well, I think that, just as you're saying that you want to kind of effectively embrace existing Fediverse accounts, right? And that kind of account model behind the scenes, that's also something that we're thinking a lot about as well. So as we look forward to kind of the next generation of Flipboard, we would prefer not to have any Flipboard accounts at all and just have it all be accounts that are in the Fediverse, right? One of the things that I think, Eugene built that a lot of people don't fully realize, Eugene Rochko, for the creator of Mastodon, is that it wasn't just the sort of microblogging, sort of Twitter-esque experience. It's also all of the infrastructure underneath that it, enables accounts, account management, authentication, all of these capabilities integrated deeply into ActivityPub. And that's a very powerful thing that I think is something that, we're looking at building on and, effectively just no longer having our own walled garden account system. Right. Obviously, we'll have, metadata attached to an account. Right. So just as you said earlier, email addresses can unlock. It can basically, be one way you sign up for a newsletter, but so could a Fediverse address. Right. And that concept, I think, is absolutely brilliant. And that is definitely something that we'd want to be able to do on Flipboard as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that could be really special. And Flipboard could be this amazing gateway for people to read ActivityPub, to discover, to explore the network and see what's there and get an understanding of what ActivityPub is beyond the confines of microblogging or an Instagram type thing, because lots of people have a preconceived notion of ActivityPub being one format, and the reality is it can be so many formats. And having an agnostic Flipboard reader would allow you to mix and match and have more of a chaotic experience in a way that I think is what makes the web magical.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, a good form of chaos, right? Discovery through just lots of different, pieces of content that are relevant for some thematic reason, or because they're shared by somebody that you trust. However you discovered it, being able to see all that in one place is something that is really great. And to the point you made earlier, I think is a really important one that bears repeating, which is ActivityPub is not just about short microblogging kinds of user experiences. It is also about long form writing and federating that. It's also ultimately about podcasts, a two-way relationship. Podcasts are amazing in that they're built on RSS. Love the whole, ethos. I think it was Anil Dash who talked about the power of just being able to say, get this podcast wherever you, or listen to us wherever you get your podcasts. That power of that, but then complementing that with a two-way relationship. So who's listening to your podcast, right? And then enabling more discovery around podcasts. Video is another thing, right? That, there's constantly YouTubers I'm discovering it, realize, my God, I wish if only I'd been, listening to this, a year earlier, product leaders, fantastic lectures, fantastic, YouTubers that are, really putting out amazing content, but maybe they put it out a year ago or 2 years ago, right?
And the algorithm doesn't surface it.
Exactly. The algorithm doesn't surface it. YouTube has one algorithm to fit everyone. And I think that's a huge change. With ActivityPub, you can apply any algorithm. There can be, all sorts of different algorithms, even in a single product. There could be multiple algorithms. They could be built by anyone and implemented and then utilized against this whole array of content.
It would be amazing if we end up with ActivityPub search engines, like a Google for ActivityPub with one algorithm. But it's not just returning results, it's returning content as well. That'll be just different explorers and different algorithms that maybe are biased towards different formats or types of content or types of creator. There's so many interesting opportunities there.
You're right. I mean, it's a whole new social web, right? And the web browsers we have today, the search engines we have today, aren't really the right type of product to effectively surf that social web, right? And that's the thing that is extremely exciting. Also, it's not just going to be one search engine, right? There's going to be lots of different ways to discover this content. So when you think about all the writers on Ghost, you have discovery algorithms today, right? Have you thought about how that's going to apply to, the ActivityPub realm as you start to federate?
A little bit, but not a huge amount. I think we're thinking most of the ways in which we think about these types of things are very organic. And how can we allow people to surface what they like to each other, rather than how can we push discovery in a particular direction? But honestly, we're not quite deep enough in to have fully formed thoughts on what the best way to do that is yet. But it's interesting. What you just said gave me the thought of, I wonder if we'll end up with a different type of browser. I wonder if there will be a ActivityPub browser rather than a web browser that is a different experience based on the way in which this type of content evolves and grows. That's a fascinating rabbit hole to go down.
Well, and in particular, because from what I understand in reading your blog posts, you've been thinking about actually embedding the whole article in the ActivityPub post, right? That's kind of a mind-blowing thing, right? It's not just a link to an article that lives somewhere else. Like the whole article is in the ActivityPub post.
That's right. Yeah. And this is it makes perfect sense and yet is somehow completely new, which is weird. So, we've had blog posts for ages, the whole blog post is on the web. And we had RSS feeds, which were often truncated because people wanted the web traffic. So you get a preview, but then they wanted people to click through because they want the web traffic because maybe you've got an ad. As we got into email newsletters, things like Ghost and Substack that are about sending articles over email, became popular to kind of receive the entire article in an encapsulated form and read it where you want to read it in your inbox. We're doing the exact same thing with ActivityPub, is just send the whole article. But the funny thing from a technical point of view is that with email, there's this middleman, right? So you write an article, you send an email, it has to go through a whole load of web servers that someone else operates. They decide whether or not it's spam. Maybe they stop it halfway through, and then maybe some proportion of people ultimately receive the email. And so you have this big middleman cottage industry that's very expensive for sending emails. With ActivityPub, you have one creator that sends the whole article to someone else's inbox, and there isn't a middleman. I mean, there is in the sense that there's a server somewhere, right? But it's a much more streamlined approach, and that's an interesting new dynamic. And it comes with complexity. There's more onus on spam prevention on the recipient, but it comes with a lot of dismantling old gatekeepers in terms of the distribution potential. And that's exciting. I like that a lot.
That is really exciting, man. I mean, when you look at what can be in that ActivityPub post, so obviously you can have formatted text. Can you have images, video? How are you looking at those things?
So ActivityPub is fairly agnostic. You can, in theory, shove almost anything into it. The question becomes, what is the client on the other side prepared to receive? Can they understand the formatting? Do they have some way of displaying it? And there's going to be a little bit of a push and pull there around. I can see this evolving a bit like how Twitter @mentions got invented. People just started saying, "Hey, @Mike, what do you think of this?" There was no notification. There was no link to your username. It's just how people started using it. So I think if we get platforms in the ActivityPub network that start innovating with content types and pushing it out, and it doesn't work in all clients, if they're popular enough, it might cause those things to be adopted, and those things might end up driving the standard and what is possible to display. So I think there's going to be some experimentation, some innovation, some things that do work, some things that don't work, and a little bit of boundary pushing around how much can we include? How dynamic could this be? Because I want to receive an article with one of those cool New York Times dynamic charts where I can click and drag, right? But that requires an object with JavaScript and other things. I don't think we can do that yet, but can we do that in future? Maybe.
Yeah, that concept of pushing the boundaries and, doing some collaborations with other folks that are building readers and building clients. And, I think that is a really important moment that we're in, in the Fediverse. It's, I sometimes tell folks, I feel like I'm on Team Fediverse and not just like the CEO and, product person at Flipboard. I feel much more like, I'm collaborating with other product builders to build the right overall experience and ecosystem for the world, right? And I'm one of those players. And the fact that you're building this, much richer ActivityPub post, I can tell you like that we will make sure that we can support that directly in Flipboard, right? And help further push those boundaries, because I think that is exactly what's needed now. That we have an opportunity, and it doesn't come along very often, to say, you know what, let's just kind of like take a giant step back and think about how should the web work going forward. And that really is what we're talking about right now. Making RSS more of a two-way relationship instead of a one-way relationship, fundamentally improving discovery, improving the reading and consumption experience. These are all possible right now.
I'm curious if there are any parallels, from your early work in browsers and being a part of a set of web standards that came before this one. Does it feel very different? Does it feel the same? Does it feel
it feels remarkably similar, John. It is. Like, for example, when we were building the early versions of Netscape Navigator, one of the things that we wanted to do was make HTML more be able to support applications, more sophisticated applications, right? So, for example, having a toolbar where you could, click on buttons or maybe drag the toolbar around or drag and drop inside of HTML, right? So we needed to create an event model and actually make that part of HTML, right? So there was some work that we did and some work that Microsoft did to basically build an event model. And those ideas were not part of any sort of W3C, kind of. There was some work that was going on with W3C, but it wasn't really kind of at the point where it's like practically implementable. So we just pushed the boundaries, right? And we did some stuff. Microsoft did some stuff. People did complain that, like, wait, this isn't really part of the standard. What's going on, right? But then we gradually coalesced around a standard, together and moved the world ahead. And that's the kind of thing that I think you have to be able to do in order to advance things, because otherwise we'll just stay in this ethereal, theoretical land all the time, right? And we won't move things forward.
That's right. It's amazing to me that we have these two really clear, obvious examples of this working really well and really badly. Web browsers evolved and got better and got better and got better, and we slowly dropped the things that were holding everything back, like IE6 is obviously the classic example from that era. But email, HTML, the opposite path, right? Today, it's still tables. It still doesn't support web fonts. It still has all these crazy limitations where you're still injecting CSS inline because the rendering engines of Outlook are based on Microsoft Word, if I remember correctly. And Google decided we're going to innovate with Chrome, but we're not going to innovate with Gmail. And so the entire, what you can do with an email newsletter stagnated completely and never moved. And that's an interesting little historical artifact of just having these two touch points of ActivityPub could go either one of these ways, depending on whether we as products manage to push the spec forward based on what people want it to do, not necessarily just on what the technology is doing at its starting point.
No, exactly. I think you need to have this kind of spirit of collaboration across multiple companies and people in the standards bodies, and and also critically importantly, creators and publishers and people who are actually building businesses on all this stuff. And I think that, like, I sometimes use the analogy of, like, when you're writing an email and you've got it, maybe it's a long email, it's 3-4 paragraphs, and somehow your computer crashes and now you got to go write it again. When you write it the second time, it's like almost always like way better, right? Because you kind of already thought it through, right? And so I think that's kind of where we are with the web. We actually have this very rare chance for some of the people who actually built the web, were there in the early days, but then also a whole new generation of people as well, to kind of say, look, here's what we love about the web, and then here's the things that just aren't working. They haven't scaled. They're creating problems around business models that are leading to bad behaviors, and right. So let's take a step back and rethink this. And that's the thing that is so exciting to me, because and it's very reminiscent of the days when I was at Netscape, because it feels like we can go anywhere. We have a blank sheet of paper here, right? And as long as we stay collaborative with other key people who are actively building in this space, I'm incredibly optimistic that we're going to actually be able to solve some of these big problems.
The other thing that's cool, to your point, is no one has won this space, right? There isn't a Google, there isn't a Microsoft, there isn't a Yahoo. There's no giant 10,000, 100,000 person company who has the definitive thing. It's all we're at a very grassroots stage of mix of hackers and enthusiasts collaborating to make the thing they want, not the thing that has the most funding. And I love that. That speaks to my heart.
I know. It really is. It really, you're so right about that. And, um, you know, by creating this ecosystem, we have an opportunity to prevent some of the bad things that can happen when you do have big players emerge onto the scene, and create kind of the best practices or the best behaviors, so that, you know, even when really large companies start to play in this world, right, it's still actually a good thing overall for everyone.
Yeah. I think a big piece of that is going to be keeping as much decentralized and having multiples as we can. You know, as soon as the search engine's all narrowed to Google, the diversity of finding things on the web dramatically reduced. And by all accounts, because Google was very good at what it did for a long time, but we lost a difference of thought. And obviously now we have DuckDuckGo, and there's some interesting. Can you remember that new paid search engine? It's really cool, but I always forget the name of it. There are some alternatives again.
Oh, right. The new paid search engine. Right.
No, it's got a yellow background.
We'll put it in the show notes. I know exactly what you're talking about. And people have been, David Pierce was saying that he's switched over to this. That's right.
Casey's been talking about it. I tried it recently. It was amazing. I think that has legs, but, they're small. All the alternatives are small. So I think in ActivityPub, in the same way, the behaviors I want to encourage is going to be to try and have as few monopolies as possible. That I think is meaningful. I'm an inverse Peter Thiel on this. I do want competition. I don't want monopolies.
Yeah, the decentralization is key, as you say. That is how you make that happen, right? We have lots of instance owners. We have anyone can build an ActivityPub server, front end, service. And that's huge. And that is the thing. I mean, that is the thing that helped make the web happen, right? You effectively decentralized all that stuff. The problem was, for some of the core functionality that you still needed, discovery and a social layer, for example, because those things weren't baked into the web to begin with, then you ended up having those things effectively get centralized. And the thing that I think is such a big deal here is the most important thing that we're decentralizing is the human connection, the human relationship. That fact that nobody actually owns that, in terms of companies don't own that, but also inversely, the creators own the relationship with their own audience, right? The people who own the relationship are the ones who should own that relationship. That is like epically huge for the future of the web, to actually formalize that architecturally, right? And I think that when you do that, business models, browsing, search, all these sort of ways we think about navigating and using the web today, those will be very different, because it will be based on now all of these human connections and a whole myriad of different apps running on the same protocol. It's just a completely different experience. So I do feel like that by decentralizing that human connection, you're going to end up having it be much harder for these monolithic, centralized forces to really take hold.
I think a really underappreciated thing so far, and I think this is going to change slowly at first and then rapidly, is the scale of that decentralized human connection. Because at the moment, I think people have this perspective of, Mastodon has tens of millions of users. That's a bunch. There's a few other platforms that have single-digit millions, and then there's a long tail and thousands. And people kind of maybe look at those at the moment and think it's just not a very big network. But the underappreciated thing is that's going to just continue to grow, because it's not one company that has the network. It's every single company on top of one common network. So whereas in the past, you might have, built up 1 million subscribers on YouTube, but then, the algorithm changed. I don't get any views anymore. Now I'm going to switch to doing video on TikTok. You start from zero. You build up from scratch. ActivityPub, it's all there. So if you move between them, all your subscribers, they're still the same. They're still the same people with access to the same content. So
you're just posting from different apps, right? And growing the same subscriber and audience base from different apps.
And so now, today, it's commonly known in marketing that the most valuable thing you can have is an email address, because an email address is forever, right? No matter what, it's platform agnostic. I think ActivityPub's going to head the same way. And, one of the stats we use in our landing page is there's 4.5 billion people using email. That's more than any social network in the world. It's more than the top 3 combined, I think. ActivityPub's going that way. It's going in the direction of email. So it's going to outgrow, I think, every single social network out there eventually. And the reason I feel so certain about that is because it doesn't depend on one company. It doesn't depend on you doing great stuff with Flipboard. It doesn't depend on us doing great stuff with Ghost. It depends on everyone, and that de-risks the chances of success dramatically.
Exactly. Yeah, this concept of, network effects, where when people join a network, that network becomes more valuable, right? But what's happening is it's not just one of many networks. It's a overall network that people are joining, which then what's also interesting is that as companies federate, like Flipboard is federating our whole user base, all of our curators, so they'll be joining this network. You have entire networks joining this big network, right? So you're right. It doesn't take very many of those before you end up having, something that's absolutely massive.
That's right. This is another example of maybe something people don't completely realize yet is, Ghost has hundreds of thousands of sites, but all of those sites, many of them have millions of existing subscribers. So the scale of bringing users to the ActivityPub network is far larger than the number of Ghost sites. It's the number of communities within each Ghost site. And the more we can connect the different humans within each of these sites, whether they're the authors and the publishers or the readers and the commenters, the faster that whole situation grows. Which, I think perhaps we're a little bit guilty. I know I am I feel like I can see where this is going. I'm excited about it, but we're not there yet. And I don't know about you guys, but we're not that close yet. We're kind of just getting started. So at risk of coming off a little bit too optimistic, I know there's a lot of work between where we are now and getting to this utopian vision of what we're talking about. But if we can get there, the potential is very special.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it's interesting too, because, when you imagine a world where all these different apps are connected by a common social layer, right? Now, what becomes really important, and I think will be very healthy, is that people have to specialize. Companies have to specialize when you're building on ActivityPub, right? Because what you don't have to do anymore is build the entire stack. Like what we see today happening, where everyone's just becoming another version of TikTok. They have their own social graph, and then they're doing vertical video. Everyone becomes versions of themselves, and you just have these like impenetrable vertical stacks that aren't compatible with each other. And it's all a mutually exclusive, either these guys win or those guys win kind of model, versus a scenario where you have a company, a product team focus on what they are particularly good at, right? The stuff that they are uniquely good at. They don't have to build a follow graph. They don't have to build a whole social layer. And they don't have to build a TikTok thing just to be competitive with other social platforms, right? They can focus on what they are particularly good at. And that's a whole other way of thinking. I'm curious, when you think about Ghost, what are the things that are unique to what you're building? What is it that's special specifically about your approach with Ghost, independent of ActivityPub?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot in both the model of the product as well as the model of the business. The product we created at a time when the dominant open source publishing platform, WordPress, was starting to move more towards this website builder space, competing with Squarespace. And we felt like it was important for the web, important for journalism, to have a platform that was open source, decentralized, freely available to everyone, to level the playing field of technology for what was available to publish online with, that was purely focused on publishing, not on website building, not on real estate websites, but just the best possible publishing platform. And that's what we have been on a mission for 10, 11 years to create. And some people say we've done well, other people not as much, but that's what we care the most about. And that holds a very special place in my heart. I think to have journalism with integrity, you have to have technology with integrity. And in my mind, open source is the way to have technology with integrity. And I want the best journalism to win because it's the best journalism, not because they have the best platform. And I think like BuzzFeed, especially early BuzzFeed, was a great example of the best technology winning. And Upworthy, that was the best technology winning. They figured out how to crack the algorithms. The content, aside from BuzzFeed News, which was incredible at one point, was not good. It captured hearts and minds, not necessarily in a good way. And it was because their technology was great. So I would like for a local newsroom to have the same quality of technology as the New York Times and for them to be on the same playing field. If we can do that, we've gotten somewhere. And that's different to the majority of our competitors and how they're thinking about it. The other thing that's a little bit unique and weird about us is everything I just said has been wrapped in what I've at various points referred to as a thought experiment, which is what if you were to build a company that does the exact opposite of every other company? And, my frustration with technology over the years has always been, it's the same story every time. Someone has a great product idea and they raise a bunch of money. They say they're going to change the world. And then at some point they sell it, it shuts down, it goes public, it screws over its users, it sells data. It's just there's some ulterior motive that is predicated on creating extreme wealth. And so my thought experiment in creating Ghost was, what if you had a technology company that does what it says it's going to do at the expense of everything else? So the Ghost is set up as a not-for-profit organization, primarily to ensure that it will always and forever be independent.
Ghost is all about providing an open publishing platform that publishers, big and small, can count on forever.
True independence. Yeah, true independence. That cannot be taken away from you, that cannot be subverted. And, one of the critical things, we've seen the degradation of platforms over time, right? Especially as the internet has matured. And at various points, we've seen some that were good suddenly turn very bad. And there's recent examples and there's less recent examples. The critical thing with open source platforms is if that happens to an open source platform, you can say, nope, not listening to you guys anymore. You've lost the plot. We're taking all your code. We're going over here and we're going to continue the way we want to continue. And as a community of users, that can be decided for zero cost, for zero legal liability. You just rename it and take it in your own direction. And that is interesting, one, because it's possible, and that's a good thing, but two, because it incentivizes the original platform not to be bad in the first place. Because if you do something bad, your users can just leave. They can leave. They can go out the door. You don't have a moat. You don't have a monopoly. And I think that can be really healthy.
Moatless technology.
Moatless technology, I think, is something we should aspire to. Fill the canals with grass.
Exactly.
Let people out.
Let them in or out. And, when you look at publishers, another thing that you seem to have done a really nice job at is enabling them to have kind of a payment model, a business model around their content creation. So can you explain a little bit about, what you do now and how you see that evolving a bit in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. The simplest way, I think most people have heard of Substack at this point, is we enable the same business model that Substack has made very popular within the publishing space. We started on it actually before Substack existed. And the idea was to bring the software as a service business model where people are pretty comfortable paying a monthly subscription for something that they really care about and value. Bring that to creators, to publishers. We have quite a strong focus on news and journalism, but we also have a lot of new media creators, podcasters, YouTubers, also a lot of business journalism. A lot of companies use Ghost to power their blogs. And I think aligning the incentives is so critical. We've we're in the end, it feels like, of this era of clickbait journalism where publishers used to make money from newspapers. That money went away. Then they had to make money from web advertising. Google and Facebook were taking all of it, so they needed more traffic. So they started writing headlines that would get more traffic so that they could get more views on the ad, so that they could just stay alive and not do yet another round of layoffs. And it did not work, and it did not work, and it did not work. And it led to the polarization of a lot of things. It led to the lowest level of trust in news that we've had since records began, as far as I know. And the economic incentives of who are you publishing for? Is it to get traffic for advertisers, or is it to serve your audience? Had a lot to do with that. I think it had a huge amount to do with that. And so what this business model of simple membership subscriptions unlocks is for publishers, but particularly news publishers, but really everyone, to treat their audience in the same way that Netflix treats its audience, in the same way that Spotify treats its audience. It has to build a product they want. It has to create content that they want. And if they're not impressed and they don't think the quality is high enough, they will press cancel. And that's when revenue goes down. So it incentivizes publishers to create content that's aligned with their audience, that their audience needs, that their audience wants, that their audience cares about. And typically that content is much higher quality. Go figure. You can produce less of it. You can spend more time on it. You usually, people who will pay for engagement with your content usually have much more respectful engagement with it, for want of a better description. And we've got so many publishers now that have proved that this is a really viable model for creators, as we call them now, publishers as we've called them in the past. Ben Thompson was one of the early movers with Stratechery, which is an analyst in the tech news space. And that model is repeating, and through Ghost and through platforms like it, I think it offers a really promising future for the economics of creating content online and having, the Kevin Kelly, 1,000 true fans. If you can find 1,000 people who are willing to pay for your work in some capacity, who really, really love it, it can be sustainable. And it doesn't take as much as you would think to make that possible. You need a passionate audience that really cares. You can't just be writing random news or random posts. You have to be on a topic that people are like, I want this and I can't easily get it somewhere else. If you fulfill that, it solves the economics in a really meaningful way, in a really sustainable way, that gives me a lot of hope for the future.
That is really fantastic. The concept of having a subscription button that someone can press. So there's follow, but then there's also subscribe, right? So have you thought about federating the subscription button, right? So like if I'm in an ActivityPub experience, some maybe it's Flipboard or some other product, and I'm looking at a post, would I be able to say, okay, let me subscribe right here. I don't have to go to some other place to do it. I can just subscribe right here, and then it unlocks and I just see the rest of it.
Yeah. I think we can do that. I might, someone might take this recording and years from now, the Twitter remind me and whatever. We're like, look what you said. And I'll be proven to be completely wrong. But so far, we have multiple ideas for how we can make this possible. And we think it should be doable. And in short, it'll be an encryption handshake between the client and the server. Is this person authorized to receive the full post or part of the post? And then an API response to either deliver all of the content or a truncated piece of it. It's very exciting. I think, as far as we can tell, these technologies are compatible, and that offers a lot of interesting additional possibilities. One of the reasons people use Ghost over perhaps some of the centralized platforms is when they're trying to create a media brand. And a media brand is about the brand, right? You want to be the New York Times, you want to be the Economist. You don't want to be columnists on platform name, someone on Tumblr, someone on Reddit, someone on Substack. And a problem with things like Substack is your readers have to download the Substack app. And in that Substack app is every other publisher. And what we find is independent media brands, they want either their own app or they want something that isn't going to dominate and take away from their brand. So I could see Ghost publishers telling their readers, go download Flipboard. You want to read all your paid content in a beautiful UI, in a nice reader experience on a iPhone or a tablet. Use this reader app. It's fantastic. Equally, the publishers themselves might be able to log into Ghost and do that. But it opens up, you could consume paid content in multiple different places. You don't have to have it all in your email inbox. If you don't want it all there, you could get it out.
This is a problem I think social media has in general as well, which is this over rotation around a For You feed or a following feed. And then that's the only way you consume. And there's many problems with that model. But one of those problems is that it takes away the sort of deep dive, intentional use of social media for learning about a thing deeply, right? Because for the nature of following and For You is they're totally random, right? Just like my email inbox, right? And so like what I want to be able to do is say, all right, I really want to go big on learning about, I don't know, how to sail. And now I want the best content, the best writers, the best videos, the best podcasts all in one place. And then deep dive on that versus this sort of snacking use case that most social media exists in today. Is completely random. It's kind of mindless. There's no intention behind it. You just absorb whatever comes to you, right?
I think, the old saying, first we make our tools and first we shape our tools and then our tools shape us. I think there's a parallel here where, first that we shape our algorithms around our content, but eventually we shape content around algorithms. And so what happens so often with decentralized networks is there's a lot of creativity at the beginning, and then this concentration to a baseline average. When Mr. Beast decides what you do is thumbnails like this, and then suddenly everyone's got a thumbnail like that, and then the titles have to be caps, and now suddenly all titles are caps. There's this deviation towards the mean where everything ends up looking the same because people are trying to be successful, and in order to do so, they are optimizing to the algorithm, whether it's Google or TikTok or YouTube.
And then meanwhile, the algorithm changes and it moves somewhere else, right? And then they got to all change. Well, and I guess now we have to do YouTube shorts. All right, how are we going to make that happen, right?
And so what I hope we get to with ActivityPub is a diversity of algorithm where there's not one dominant one, so that people can be more creative. They don't have to perform for an algorithm to succeed. They can just do whatever it is they want to do and succeed, because it's possible to win that way.
I think we're going to get there. I think what Blue Sky has already done really has done some, I think, very promising and innovative work on the concept of custom feeds. Those concepts, I think, you're going to see come this year into the Fediverse, and I think that's going to be really exciting. So that we aren't just all hinged to a following or a For You feed, a one size fits all feed. Yeah, and I think coming back to this idea of federating the subscription to a creator on Ghost, that is another really big enabler, right? Because again, what you're really doing is you're trying to put the best content in front of its natural audience, right? And when people can appreciate that great content, the first thing they want to do is get more of it. And they're far more likely, because they're in that intentional space, right, that they want to pay right there. And one of the problems that I see, it's been a big problem on the internet for a long time, is like, okay, great, go get a subscription, sign up, and think about how hard that is, right? And how many steps you have to go through just to make a subscription work, right? And you got to create a whole other account with a different password and
figure out what Patreon is.
Exactly. Yeah. It's just, I support a number of creators on Patreon, but I'm not going to go to patreon.com to go see what those creators are posting and like a completely different place I got to go to now, right? That should just be federated. I really am excited about your thinking here around kind of federating that subscription model. And I'll tell you, that is definitely something that I'll work with you on in Flipboard to enable inside the reading experience seamlessly, right? You see a great piece of content about something you really care about, and make it incredibly simple to just buy it right there and see the rest of the content right there. You don't lose your place. It's just a simple, easy experience. Dude, we got to make that happen.
we might have to get Stripe involved in that conversation as well, because I have a feeling it's going to be key. But yes, I think that would be amazing.
Have you looked at other types of micropayments or other kinds of models for supporting creators? Any experimentation or thoughts on that front?
We're doing quite a lot with different payment methods. So in the US, obviously, credit cards, the primary payment method, and buy now, pay later services are also getting quite popular. But outside of the US, payment methods are vastly different across Europe, South America. And fortunately, Stripe allows a lot of different relatively easy experimentation to have payment methods that are more suitable for international audiences. So a lot there. Less in the specific models. I think micropayments is something that has been tried more times. It's failed 100% of the times it's been tried, and it has been tried more times than anyone can count. And the idea that it's going to work is always the same, but the reality is also always the same, which is that it's not meaningful enough to work out. And so I'm not super optimistic on micropayments. I'm willing to be proven wrong at some point if someone comes up with a great solution. I'm interested in other types of models, though, where you can get communities collaborating, or maybe having non-monetary based contributions that allow special access. I think that's interesting. Obviously, there's crypto as unsolved and interesting, which I think suffers is in a similar place that they haven't got out of. There's this early chaotic era of open technology, which is, it's exciting, but no one really understands what to do with it. And some technologies transcend that and move out of it. And crypto has not yet. And I'm still somewhat optimistic that it will find mainstream, easy adoption where people really don't need to know what a blockchain is. But we're not quite there yet. But I'm still optimistic that might lead us somewhere interesting.
Have you thought about bundling models or other kinds of ways for creators to kind of like pool together and maybe have some sort of collective? Or
yeah, this is the one of the most common questions we get. People call it subscription fatigue, right? It's this theory that once everything's a subscription, God, you don't want any more subscriptions. We have thought about it, but what we have seen play out so far is it doesn't really seem to happen ever, or at least not in the space that we operate in. And the reason for that is that it's not really 50 people subscribing all to the same 3 publications or same 10 publications. It's 10 publications and 50 people, and each one of them subscribes to something different. And you might have, these handful of really popular people that everyone subscribes to. But broadly, the way we see people interacting with subscriptions is it's far more niche. They're all subscribed to different stuff. There's not necessarily a giant overlap in, it's not quite like having an Apple TV and a Netflix and a Prime and a whatever else subscription. It's kind of just these 3 individuals that are my weird hobbies that I'm not getting that content anywhere else. I can only get it from this person. It's a long tail of that. Could that eventually get to a size where there is subscription fatigue, even within creators? I think it's possible. And at that point, bundling gets interesting. I don't think we're there yet.
Well, I really appreciate how deeply you're thinking about this stuff as a product builder and as a CEO with some phenomenal publishers that are doing incredibly important work on your platform. It's easy to me to see why ActivityPub is such a no-brainer for you, right? I mean, the whole mission and ethos of Ghost being an open platform to advance the world of publishing, now embracing an open protocol to enable those publishers to have direct and audience relationships that they can own forever as well. That's just poetically, perfect. It really is the right exact combo for where you're headed.
Yeah, thank you for the kind words. We're going to try. We're going to do our best. I feel quite a lot of responsibility to do a good job for it, and quite a lot of uncertainty about the details of how exactly we're going to execute everything. There's there's a lot of people who've been in the activity space for a long time, and we are going to depend a lot on how well we're able to lean on the support and learn from a lot of the people who've already been in the space for a while, who've already built incredible tooling and infrastructure that we have the benefit of now being able to take advantage of, because we're coming in a couple of years into a lot of the early movements. But the fit is perfect for what we want to do. And I really hope we can do a good job of it. We're going to do our best, that's for sure.
Well, thanks so much for listening. You can find John at john.o'nolan.org. You can follow Mike on Mastodon at mike@flipboard.social and at mike@flipboard.com. Big thanks to our editors, Rosanna Caban and Anne Blay. To learn more about what Flipboard's doing in the Fediverse, sign up via the link in this show's notes. Until next time, we'll see you in the Fediverse.